So I guess I'll just state for the record, my name is Scott Baker with the North Carolina Sea Grant Program. Where Dick Brame is with me in my office. It's July 26, Tuesday, 2016. And I'll get started with the questions. So the first question for Dick is, I guess, state your name and where and when you were born.
My full name is Richard Brame, but everybody calls me Dick. And I was born in Brattleboro, Vermont, but only lived there 6 or so months, and we moved back to Wilson and Kinston. That's where I grew up. I grew up in eastern North Carolina.
Okay. I guess, do you want to provide an age?
I'm 61.
Okay, 61. Okay. Question 2. Could you provide a brief overview of your work history and more details about your current position?
I've worked for a variety of not-for-profit organizations, the Isaac Walton League, the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, the Pennsylvania Wildlife Federation, and the Coastal Conservation Association. I've been with CCA since 1989. I was the first executive director from 89 to 99, and then I became a fisheries director, primarily going to Atlantic States and South Atlantic Council meetings. And about 3 years ago, so about 2013 or 14, they shifted me from ASMFC to the Gulf Council. So I represent CCA at the Gulf and South Atlantic Councils now. I do primarily federal fishery issues.
Okay. What is, so it kind of reiterates that question, but what's your current relationship with fisheries environment?
I represent CCA at the Federal Fishery Council management level.
I guess, could you, ad libbing a minute, can you kind of explain, describe CCA and like what the mission is?
It's a group of anglers. There's 120,000 members, and I can remember virtually every coastal state. It's a fishery conservation organization of primarily recreational fishermen.
Let's see. So with CCA, has your relationship changed over the years? I guess it's not CCA. This is with your relationship with fisheries management. Has that changed?
I've gotten away from the state fisheries management and deal more with federal fisheries management at this point. That's probably the biggest change. When I was doing the Fisheries Reform Act, I was executive director of North Carolina and was very involved with state fisheries management.
So now I'll return to the specifics of your involvement in fisheries management and policy generally. Question 4, why did you become interested in fisheries management and policy? Or perhaps restated, how did you get involved in fisheries management policy?
CCA started as chapter in December of 1988 in North Carolina and advertised for an executive director, and I applied. And got the job in August 15th, 1989, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. So here's an esoteric question, I guess. Why does fisheries management matter?
Well, it's the proper management of any natural resource matters, and fisheries are natural, common property natural resource. So it's just good management.
Tragedy of the commons.
Yeah. If you don't manage it, not managing is a management decision.
Yeah, I agree. Now let's reflect back specifically on the Fisheries Reform Act of 1997. Why do you think the North Carolina General Assembly was compelled to take action in 1994?
As I remember, there were several causes. One was a series of articles in the News and Observer detailing problems at the Division of Marine Fisheries and the political influence that was going on at the time. And you'd have to go back and look at them to read it. But it was a week-long front page expose of the Division of Marine Fisheries. That was, I think, one factor in the Fisheries Reform Act. I think the driving one that I remember was actually crab potters. They came to the division and said, you need to limit us somehow. We won't limit ourselves. We need to limit the number of crab pots we can set, because if Joey has 400 and I got 300, I got to get 100 more, and then he'll get 100 more, and you get too many crab pots. So we need a mechanism to limit the number of crab pots. And at the time, both Dr. Hogarth and Bob Lucas, who was chairman of the Marine Fisheries Commission, took that sort of impetus and spun that into, we got to reform the whole fishery management system. So I think that was a compelling reason. And I think there was a growing recreational fishing presence that had never been in North Carolina before, and it was demanding some changes. So I think those three seemed to me, in my clouded memory, are what drove the Fisheries Reform Act.
Were there, were there specific, well, I was going to follow up to that, but are there specific, can you remember any specific things that were like the recreational people or folks were interested in? Was there talk of a license at that time?
Well, there had been off and on talk of licensing. That was probably the main thing they were interested in at that point, is some sort of licensing system.
Okay. Were there particular circumstances leading to the creation of the moratorium steering committee? I guess that's kind of rephrasing that previous question, but
It's pretty much the same. They put a moratorium in place on new regulations and created a moratorium steering committee in order to address these fishery problems that I had brought up before. So yeah, I mean.
So they actually stopped. I mean, no new regulations while this was underway.
That was part of the deal. Is there would be no new regulations until they fixed it.
So, question 7: how were you specifically involved with the moratorium steering committee process?
I believe I attended every moratorium steering committee meeting. I was not on the moratorium steering committee.
Okay.
I may have been. It seems like there was an advisory panel or something to do. I can't remember exactly. It seems like there was an advisory panel I may have been on, but I know I attended most, if not all, of the moratorium steering committee meetings. So I had a front row seat.
Question 8: do you think the various stakeholder groups were united in wanting passage of the FRA? Why or why not?
There was, I wouldn't use the word united. I think most people wanted it, but for a variety of different reasons. I think there was some trepidation. I know there was some trepidation in the recreational community about getting in bed with the division and all these other folks. But we ended up attending all the meetings and being involved in the process. But I know there was a lot of trepidation on the recreational side, and there still is.
Speaking to that, what was the nature of any controversy or disagreement? And I guess it's asking me to select one, but you can elaborate on that.
Well, the license, which ultimately never got passed until, what, I can't remember, 8 or 9.
I just read an article, I think it was 2005.
Yeah, so
implemented in 2007.
10 or 11 or 12 years later, we finally get a saltwater license. So the one thing the recreational community wanted, we were denied out of hand.
So question 9, who were the significant leaders of the FRA, and please describe their specific roles?
Well, the main drivers were Bob Lucas and Bill Hogarth. And Bill was the director of the Division of Marine Fisheries, and Bob was the chairman of the Marine Fisheries Commission. It was really, what I remember, it was really their baby. They came up with the idea and the format and started the process down the road. I hope y'all are interviewing Bob Lucas.
I believe so.
I hope so.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in all of this.
I think they're doing 10 or 12. I think the goal was to get a minimum of 10 to 12 of the key people, and then if they can get other people, they would. Do you have any personal stories about Hogarth or Lucas you'd like to share?
Not right off the top. I mean, they were very involved and key players, but I don't have any. I was trying to think of something personal about it. The thing that I remember more than anything, and it was pre-Fisheries Reform Act, is the first time they ever talked about a saltwater license. It was at a meeting at the Carteret Community College, and Dr. Mike Orbach was chairing the meeting, and it was to talk about revamping the entire saltwater license system. This is pre-Fisheries Reform Act, but the saltwater license recreational was part of it. And there was a guy dressed, as I remember, in coonskin cap and buckskins, and he was sitting in the front row with a little toy rifle or something. And he got up, Dr. Orbach got up and said he wanted to talk about changing the licensing system. This guy hops up and says, "This is taxation without representation. Let's take the Capitol." And he runs out of the room. I don't know why I remember that, but it was just nuts.
That does sound like a good Fisheries meeting.
Yeah, they used to be a lot of fun.
A little bit more buttoned down. Well, it depends, I guess. There was the meeting at the Marine Fisheries Commission when one of the representatives was there at the flounder meeting.
Oh yeah,
that got a little heated.
I bet that was tense.
Yeah, that was a little tense. That was more tense than that. So question 11. This is a longer question, I guess. It's I'll just read it just so if you want to comment. But as you know, the new law focused on 5 areas of reform: licensing, the Marine Fisheries Commission, fishery management plans, coastal habitat protection plans, and law enforcement. Some of the major provisions of the FRA: changing the license structure, fishery management plans. Yeah, so those I guess 4 different things. Which I guess if you had to categorize or prioritize, are there any ones that are more significant to you than others?
Well, requiring the management of fishery management plans is the one very good thing that came out of the Fisheries Reform Act. That and changing the commission from 17 members to 9, making it more manageable, even though you would argue they haven't done the best job, but it's clearly a better model. The licensing structure thing, I think, it made it marginally better, but you didn't get a saltwater recreational license. And as I remember, Butch Redwine put in a bill. I think there were 7,000 commercial licenses at the time, so he limited it to 7,500. So to us, that was a significant problem. Because as I remember, roughly half of the licenses at the time didn't report any income. So there's a lot of late licenses out there. So I thought that was a significant problem with the whole system.
Mm-hmm. What about so the FRA actually created the 4 standing advisory committees and the 4 regional advisory committees
Yes.
at the time? So was that a good thing, or were those any types of advisory committees in place prior to that?
Yes, I don't remember exactly. It seemed like there was a finfish advisory committee and then some regional advisory committees that met off and on. Part of the reason that they were required in the FRA is people had the idea that, or the perception that they weren't listened to, and like all advisory committees, some are listened to and some are not. So I think they just put in place probably more than they needed. I mean, I always thought they ended up with too many advisory committees. They kind of went overboard, and now they've cut back.
Yeah, it's been scaled back, I guess.
Been scaled back, but I think for a while there was too many.
So, question 12, what are the greatest successes of the FRA?
The greatest success is managing by fishery management plan, requiring FMPs, and not just managing by guess and by gosh. And reducing the size of the Marine Fisheries Commission from 17 to 9.
So the second part of that would be, what were the shortcomings?
Well, obviously the saltwater license was a problem. You have the largest user group, and not licensing to determine how many, or be able to adequately sample them. But also, they never did define a commercial fisherman. I always thought that was something that should have been a cornerstone of any Fisheries Reform Act, is defining who a true commercial fisherman is, and then limiting the license. Let them fish professionally, because you are giving them gear that can be quite destructive. and very efficient, and there needs to be a professional fishery, and that was sort of kind of what was sold in the, at least with the crab pot things, to make it a professional crab pot fishery where you limit that we can optimize the number of pots where they make the most money with the least number of pots, and that never came to fruition. That was the biggest shortcoming, one of the largest shortcomings, I thought.
And that I know that one of the iterations of the blue crab F&P that a couple years, I guess maybe 10 years ago, that came up. Big crab pot issues came up again.
Mm-hmm.
The division was thinking about trying to put a limit on it, and they were really struggling with, you know, the differences between, say, down here and then up in Albemarle. You know, it was going to be regional, and even then, there were, I guess, very vocal people who were really against it, and because there's such a huge range, probably order of magnitude in terms of the number of pots people have.
Yeah.
So do you remember back then in '94 how many other states had recreational fishing license?
I think all the ones to the south of us had licenses, and Virginia had a bay Virginia or Maryland or both had a bay license, it seemed like. But that was it. I know most of the Gulf states had a license, and the southeast states had one, as I remember.
So we were one of the few.
We were one of the few
in the southeast.
In the southeast, it didn't.
So were we the last state, basically, in the southeast?
I couldn't say for sure, but I think so.
Is there anything that you know today about the implications of the FRA that you wish you had known in 1997?
I wish it had provided for a way for citizens to sue the Division of Marine Fisheries for not acting. It didn't do that. I remember speaking before the Fisheries Reform Act. One of the biggest, most contentious issues was weak fish, and North Carolina was a severely depressed population, and they were refused. That's literally why the ASMFC got its authority, is North Carolina's refusal to manage weak fish, as I remember. And I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Oh, so is there anything you know today about the implications of the FRA that you wish you had known?
Yeah, I remember asking a Diener attorney, I said, it says right here in the fisheries manual that you should conserve, protect, educate, promote, do all this. And he looked at me and said, but nowhere does it say they have to be good at it. So there's literally there's very little way for a citizen to sue the division or the commission for them to do their job.
So there's no metric, basically, of how successful they are in terms of managing.
Yes.
So is that something that you think should be considered?
Absolutely.
If they do revisit the FRA?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's something that should be reconsidered.
So as we wrap up our conversation together, let's discuss the Act's capacity to address emerging issues going forward. I'm specifically thinking of fisheries management challenges that include issues like climate change, shift in fisheries distribution, imported seafood and changing domestic and global markets, and transition from single species management to ecosystem-based management. So first, I wanted to know your thoughts as to what you think the emerging issues are related to fisheries management in North Carolina.
Well, climate change is one of them, because fishery populations are moving, and we have to be able to adapt and be able to manage fisheries that we have never seen before, and we're going to lose fisheries that we've had for a long time. So I guess managing by fishery management plan would hopefully promulgate that. I don't know for sure, but you would hope that it would.
Do you think in general the clientele is open? I mean, I think that they will. There's always this. Well, we deal with this, and Sea Grant is dealing with trying to educate people about climate change and stuff like that. And you know, there's definitely a segment of people that either don't believe it or don't see the impacts to them directly. But this is a situation where we're already seeing evidence of that. You know, some fisheries are moving more northerly distribution, or in fact leaving our area, or our abundance in our area, type thing. So at least that's something that make them more can bring it home, I guess, to them.
Well, when it affects them, they'll change. But I mean, there's been big changes in the fisheries since I was fishing on the piers in the '60s. I mean, in terms of ethics and what you saw and what you caught. I mean, we used to catch several hundred king mackerel a year off the end of these piers at Topsail, and now they catch dozens. I think they probably caught more tarpon than they caught king mackerel. I don't know for sure, but it seems like I read more about it. So something's shifting.
Right.
Fish are shifting. We certainly don't see the menhaden we saw back in the '60s and '70s. When we used to see, I remember the first time I saw a school of menhaden, I thought it was something had broken loose. It was an algae drift or something, a seaweed that was in its block, and then a fish cut through it, and all these menhaden jumped out of the water, and I thought, damn, that's a school of fish. And they were everywhere. Now you just don't see that anymore.
I guess, what do you think, just ad-libbing to this question, but what are your thoughts on like ecosystem, or a wanted transition to ecosystem-based management as opposed to single species?
I'm all for trying. I'm a skeptic about it actually working, but I think we got to try, especially for stuff like forage species, where they have a role other than surplus production. You know, they have in a sense, every menhaden matters, because they're all, if they're not contributing to the spawning stock or reproduction, they're getting eaten, which is important a role. But I think, and we've gone further than I thought we would in my lifetime, so I think it's a good effort. But I think we know each trophic level, we know a good bit about, limnology, we know a good bit about the zooplankton and phytoplankton, and about the things that eat them and the things that eat the zooplankton and phytoplankton, but we don't know anything about the interactions between those different trophic levels. And I'm not sure we'll get there anytime soon, but we need to try. I think it's a worthy effort, but I don't look for any great breakthroughs.
Yeah, it's seems to me the best, well, I guess the most comprehensive work I've seen has kind of been like in Chesapeake Bay, where they've had just all they focus on is menhaden, striped bass, and croaker. So they've kind of got all those surveys and all the brains up there looking at that. But even then, I mean, that's just the one small piece.
Yeah, they did the multi-species VPA, the first model where they modeled the effect of weak fish, bluefish, and striped bass on menhaden populations. In one of the first iterations, if you depleted menhaden, the first thing that went away was weak fish, which is exactly what we've seen. So I always thought that was sort of telling, because they happen to, as I understand it, as menhaden decrease in the striped bass diet, you basically have this population of striped bass that spends the summer off of Massachusetts and the winter off of North Carolina, Virginia. And as it's moving down the coast in the fall, that's when the young weak fish are going out of the inlet. And if they don't have menhaden to eat, they eat whatever they can. They're eating weak fish. So that would explain the rise in natural mortality and the lack of weak fish.
Let's see. So moving on, a couple more questions. What, if anything, should be changed to ensure sustainable fisheries and healthy coastal ecosystems?
Well,
I guess, and I should have said this in the beginning, but if you want, and you've done this pretty well, but if you want to rephrase that question in your response, so they can use it. But if you, it's kind of a big question anyway.
That's right. Why is there air? Well, clearly the sustainable fisheries, there need to be metrics that they can be measured by. They have to manage to a standard, not just to the best that they can. They need to manage to a standard. And if they don't meet it, they need to be taken to task for that. And by they, I mean the commission and the division, so that citizens can have an effect on marine fishery management. And healthy coastal ecosystems, I mean, that's just a whole nother ball of wax.
Yeah, it's water quality, development.
You know, and I think one of the early iterations of the Fisheries Reform Act was there was as I remember, and I think Melvin Shepard was part of this. It actually gave the Marine Fisheries Commission the authority over coastal development, as I remember. And of course that got booted pretty quick in the process. But there actually was one iteration or some part of coastal development, but it was pretty broad reaching, and it was a recommendation of the the Moratorium Steering Committee, and it got booted out pretty quick. It didn't even make the first cut, I don't think.
I would imagine so. So 2 questions left. So what, if anything, should be changed to ensure sustainable coastal economies and communities?
If the economics will support it, they'll be sustainable. I don't know how you change things to make something that might not be economically supportable just to keep it there. I'm not sure how you would do that.
Yeah, I mean, market forces are
gonna drive it, and you're not going to change that, I don't think. So you in order to be sustainable, they'll have to adapt to the current market forces and not the other way around.
So I'll just add lib to this question. What do you think? I mean, if you look at the numbers, describe how recreational the numbers of licenses, since we have that now, over the last several years, is it kind of increased, or it's been relatively stable?
It's been at least stable, if not increased some, because I think nationally it's decreased during the recession, and I think recently it's either stabilized or started to increase again. But don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it, but
I know that some of the offshore trips and stuff like that went way down,
Yeah.
like for hire and stuff like that. Even private wreck offshore trips went down, like 2008 when the economy hit. And
Yeah.
all that, so.
well, that's the one thing we're finding. As popular as it seems to be that offshore species like red snapper and gag grouper are, what we found, if you look at the number of trips, is less than 10% of the trips are greater than 3 miles off the beach. So in a survey like the Marine Recreational Information Program, MRIP, it doesn't adequately sample those things. And it's like the NOAA really should have come to the forefront and said, we need an offshore strata. We need to identify these people and sample them. And that's what's happening in the Gulf. They've created these offshore permits to have a universe they can sample from.
In fact, we're working with DMF to create some or pilot test some like infographics, kind of taking some of their annual reports and making a picture out of it. And just one of the things that I noticed from this, not the stock status report, but the landings update, is you got like the top 5 species by weight are all like offshore, tuna,
Yeah.
mahi, and those are a very, like you said, those are a small segment of trips. And then the numbers, the landings by numbers, spot, bluefish, those are all obviously more inshore.
That's right.
And of course, the species that people are targeting when you ask them what they're fishing for, drum, flounder,
trout.
Those are all trout, and those are all inshore type things. So it's definitely, tale of two fisheries. It just depends on which way you look at it in terms of pounds or numbers.
That's
trips.
right. And to expect a broad-based survey to be able to adequately sample something that occurs less than 10% of the time is foolhardy. So it's something that should be addressed.
So with that, I'll just say, is there anything else you'd like to share or add? I guess regarding the Fisheries Reform Act, the first version, or if they're going to move forward with, I don't know what. I think part of the goal of this project was to capture thoughts from the people that were there, so that when this does come to fruition, people do talk about it again, that they don't, aren't reinventing the wheel in terms of looking at things.
Well, you'd have to remember what it was like before the Fisheries Reform Act, where you would just have a problem and you'd throw a regulation at it. And these regulations were often taken in a vacuum And there were times when the regulations the commission passed and what became law were not the same either. I mean, it was just sort of almost like the Wild West. And so changing to the fishery management plan concept, I think was, like I've said, is probably the most important thing, and provide for at least a framework for rational management. Now, there needs to be a metric that they need to be measured by, but I think that's the big thing, is to understand what it was like before, because they were, they would just do a regulation on scrap fish. Wasn't related to any particular species, happened to be, but you couldn't have but so many pounds of scrap fish in an operation. It wasn't through a management plan, and then the next meeting they'd talk about shrimp trawling or crab trawling or something, whatever. So it was all over the place. It was hard to have any kind of rational management.
Just, I guess, a follow-up to a previous question. I was thinking, what was the, if you remember, or what was the economics like of like commercial fishing and or recreational fishing at the time, prior or on the cusp of the FRA in mid-90s?
I don't recall, but the rule of thumb was, if you looked at economic impact, the recreational fishery was about 10 times the commercial fishery, which is not a reason to do anything one way or the other, but it shows the relative importance of them. But I don't recall exactly. The one thing I do recall is, and this is, again, my hazy memory, but it seemed like there were 7,000 commercial fishermen at the time, and I remember half of them did not report any income, and I think 1,500 of them reported more than $5,000 or $10,000. I can't remember. So the pool of true commercial fishermen who made a living at it was very small.
Yeah, and that's similar to today. I don't know the numbers, but seems like only a percentage of the obviously licenses that are active or have landings attributable.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I guess that concludes our interview. Unless you have anything else.
Seemed like there was imported seafood.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Again, that's driven by market forces. Mm-hmm. But I've often wondered if my grandfather sat around the table back in the early 1900s and said, "Well, I'm not going to eat a farm-raised pig. I'm only going to eat wild pigs." I mean, I wonder if they had those conversations.
Right.
I mean, like it or not, farm-raised seafood is the future. I mean, if we didn't have modern animal husbandry techniques, there wouldn't be a deer or turkey left.
Yeah, I mean, 90% of U.S. seafood's imported. About 50% of that is aquaculture.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's growing by leaps and bounds, and wild caught production is pretty much stable, if declining for some species. It's reached pretty much capacity.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be much more growth. They're not going to find any new uncovered stocks anywhere. But could be said more for aquaculture, though.
That's right. Anyway.
Okay. All right.